Hi, Pamela Davis here, back for part 4 of Ghosts and Other Dimensions, part of the series on reincarnation, the Reincarnation Chronicle. And last time in episode, in part 3 rather, we talked about ghosts and their attachment through disassociation and confusion. One of the things that can create a real problem when someone has crossed over suddenly or very violently. This is one of the reasons why it's very important, and why mediums will confirm how important it is to pray for those who transition. Pray that they find the light. Pray that they find their inner guidance, those that they love. Just pray for them in their well-being. See them in the light. See them in protection and in joy and at peace. And prayers apparently that are offered, and the Catholics have known this for a long time. This does help. Catholic people go in and light candles for their departed ones, which I'm sure is a good idea. But prayers of any kind, any good intention toward those who have recently departed are very, very much to be recommended, because there are some terrible situations, as we all know, where you just don't want people stuck in that. I remember many years ago, before I was married, I was dating a man who took me to a trendy restaurant in Hollywood that I'd never been into before. And we sat down at a table, and I had only been there a few minutes before I began to get this dreadful feeling. I mean, just this horrible feeling came over me. I had no problem with my date. We were fine. I had no other reason to be feeling so oppressed. But it got so bad that actually the tears came to my eyes, and he said to me, what's wrong with you? What's the matter? I said, I don't know. I said, I just don't know. It's this place. I think it's this restaurant or something. I feel like somebody has been murdered here. So he looked at me in the strangest way. I said, well, that's weird. He happened to know the owner, who came over a moment later to the table to greet us. And the owner looked all upset and distraught about what was going on. And he said, I've been having the worst time. He said, we've had police all over the place and everything. He said, just last week, one of my kitchen help was murdered about 2 o'clock in the morning. He was the last one here as a dishwasher. And the back door was open, and somebody came in from the parking lot and stabbed the poor man to death in a very brutal way. He said, it's been just awful. Well, my date looked at me, and I had just said, I don't know what's wrong. It's like somebody's been murdered in here. And I was just stunned, because this had never happened to me before. I had, I didn't realize that I was even able, but that's how heavy these things can be, where people who normally don't even pick up on this sort of thing will. And this is why it's so important to cleanse an area where there's been a violent murder, most especially. Because the spirits, not only do the spirits need help to get out of there, and they need blessings and prayers and so forth and support, but there's also, and then not getting that and being stuck there, they become a haunting ghost. There's another kind of haunting ghost too. We talked about, I mentioned this in a recent episode where I mentioned Anne Boleyn at the Tower of London. Well, Anne Boleyn is by no means an exception in this kind of case. Ghosts are frequently the souls of people who have been executed or murdered. And when the execution is carried out in such a way that the victim is absolutely convinced that he or she is innocent, and that they're being wrongfully executed for something they did not do. This kind of absolute conviction and revulsion at being put to death for something that they didn't do will frequently create the situation of a ghost. There was a beautiful young girl in a castle in northern Italy, the castle of Malaspina, rather well-known castle, who, because she was born albino to her noble family, was kept indoors and never allowed to go out, never allowed to meet people. Her family, her parents were so ashamed that they had brought an albino child into the world. And from her window, she fell in love with a boy who worked on the estate. He was a laborer of some sort. And somehow she was able to get together with him, and they fell in love and intended to run away together. But before they could get away, it was discovered she was missing. And the father sent out soldiers to look for her, found them, and dragged her back into the castle. And her parents, who must have been unspeakably cruel people, were so outraged that she had tried to escape and get away. And actually, after she was dragged back, she did persist in trying to see this boy, who probably was executed himself at that point. That her parents took her into the dungeon of the castle, chained her to the wall, and shut up with her a wild boar and a dog, and walled up the door and walled her in and left her to die, chained to the castle wall. This was in the 1500s, 16th century. Well, this became a local legend to the point that most people no longer believed it could possibly have happened, except that only a few years ago, there was some work being done on the castle, some restoration, and there were workmen digging around, and they got into that area where the girl supposedly had been walled up, and sure enough, they did find bones of what the forensics showed was a young woman who had been chained to the wall, and in the same space they found the bones of two animals. So it was a true story. Now this girl, the poor albino daughter, is seen to haunt this castle. Many people have seen her over the centuries. Upon visiting the castle, she has been seen walking around. And of course, this would be an attachment due to indignation and outrage at having been put to death in such a merciless and cruel and unjust way, which is a frequent occurrence when this kind of thing happens. So it's very important to pray for the release of souls who have died in terrible ways. And there are, of course, many terrible ways. Souls who die in fires and things like this. You can't assume that just because they're gone, everything is okay. It does take some work to check it out. Now, there are things that you can do in places like this. It's very important. For example, when you're going to buy a house, don't just buy any house. Be sure to do a little homework and find out if somebody has been murdered in the house. Even if they're supposed to reveal if someone has died in the house. It's important to know this, because no matter how they've died, it's important to know if you need to bring in some sort of shaman or priest or someone to bless the house in case there's something unpleasant there. So you can use sage. There are things you can do yourself. You can use sage, burn sage, and use holy water and all kinds of. There are a number of things you can do. One of the things that you should never do in a house or any place is to use a Ouija board, a Ouija board. These seem to be a device that sets up an immediate portal into the lower astral. Once in a great while, you might get an evolved spirit that comes through on a Ouija board, but it's very unlikely. This creates an open conduit and an open doorway into the lower astral, where you have all kinds of tormented souls who are looking for any kind of way to make themselves heard and known on the level of physical being on earth, and who will come through and play any role that you want them to play just to get the attention. And people playing with Ouija boards, of course, are usually wide-eyed and amazed at what's happening, and it can be very powerful. On the other hand, once in a while, you'll get an amazing experience, such as my brother and I had when we lived in Mexico City. And on a rainy afternoon, we were on our own and had nothing to do, and happened to have a Ouija board, and said, oh, why don't we play with a Ouija board? We were just kids. So we pulled out the Ouija board, and for the first few seconds, the planchette just kind of drifted around, nothing happened. And then it was as though some powerful hand came and just grabbed it and started moving it around the Ouija board. We could hardly hold on to it. It almost flew off the board. And I asked, do we know you? And the answer was yes. And immediately it spelled out the name Luis, which was the name of a man who had loved my mother very, very dearly, and who had died of a rare form of cancer only months earlier. And I said, well, do you have a message for us? Yes. And without hesitation, he spelled, watch out for robbers. And then the planchette just flew up to goodbye. And that was it. So we were just astonished. And we told our mother as soon as she got home what had happened. And I'm sure she believed us, but, you know, watch out for robbers. Well, what could we do? Well, we went to an outdoor event the next weekend at one of the big arenas in Mexico City. And my mother had just gotten a letter with $400 in it in cash. And before she'd been able to get to the bank, she just put it into her purse. We went to this event, and a pickpocket came through and got the envelope with my mom's money. And then a few days after that, our car was broken into on the street in front of our building, and the radio was stolen. So this all happened within 2 weeks of being warned by Luis, watch out for robbers. So, but this was the Ouija board under the best of circumstances. This is not something that is recommended. So we'll go through this was part 4. We're going to go through another part 5 on other aspects of ghosts and other dimensions, and I'll see you there.